The Road to El Dorado, an animated film, came out in March of 2000. Dreamworks Pictures, Dreamworks animated feature, their third animated feature after Ants and the Prince of Egypt. For whatever reason, I have been avoiding making a video about this movie. I'm not exactly sure why. I had never seen it prior to making this video, and I knew very, very little about it, but I'm just going to go ahead and say right away, I really, really like this movie. There's so much to love about this movie. It's a delight. It's a delightful movie. You have your two protagonists, Tulio and Miguel. They are voiced by Kevin Kline and Kenneth Branagh, both great, both hilarious. They are these sort of con artist scoundrels in the 16th century. They've smuggled their way on board a Spanish vessel bound for the New World for conquest. For a decent stretch of this film, especially at the beginning, the opening 30 minutes or so, because this movie was reworked, retooled, had a very difficult production, as I'm going to detail. But for about the first 30 minutes, you really, really see the possibilities of the movie that could have been if they'd maybe stuck to their convictions, if there hadn't been so much meddling. But you get to see sort of the idealized version of what the screenwriters of this movie, Terry Rossio and Ted Elliott, said that they wanted. They had the idea, what if the funny, flawed sidekicks who populate animated movies, what if they were allowed to be the center of the movie? What if they were allowed to be the lead or the leads of a movie? So we have our two anti-heroes, Miguel and Tulio, who have smuggled their way aboard this vessel bound for the New World, but they don't want to get caught by the conquistadors who are running the ship. They need to find a way to escape. So first, they befriend a crooked horse named Altivo. He's very funny animal sidekick character. And then they escape with their crooked horse pal on a little rowboat, a little dinghy. They first evade the fleet of giant Spanish ships and then have to make their way in their tiny rowboat through these enormous waves in a genuinely thrilling sequence. This then gives way to some of the funniest animated gags I have ever seen in a Hollywood movie, and you're really seeing the movie clicking on all cylinders for what it wants to be, for what it could be, a mixture of action spectacle and really, really funny cartoony gags brought really, really well to life by the animation team. So I'm fascinated by this era of animation, and you see in The Road to El Dorado a look at what could have been, but instead the movie was a flop. It failed at the box office, failed big, and then the next year Dreamworks had the enormous animated hit they'd always wanted in the form of Shrek, and they just pivoted their entire animation strategy to just Shrek sequels, and movies that are like Shrek. And I'm Matt Stokes. I'm of the 1 Week Rental Movie Podcast. Every week we do a deep dive into a different movie, give you behind the scenes history of the movie, and then give you a review of the movie itself. This video is sort of a spin-off mini episode, part of a series of videos covering animated movies, what I call forgotten animated movies. Now, they're not actually forgotten. What I really just mean is they didn't make $1 billion at the box office. They're not The Lion King. That's basically what I mean. So I'm particularly fascinated with this era of theatrical animation in the American film industry. So many movie studios tried their hand at competing with Disney because Disney was the big name in town when it comes to making big animated movies. For example, Warner Brothers tries, they put their resources behind making theatrical animation. They make Space Jam in 1996, Quest for Camelot in 1998, and then The Iron Giant in 1999. It doesn't really work out, and they say, forget it, moving on, done with that idea. The studio that actually did make a sustained run at competing with Disney, and indeed succeeding even more than Disney succeeded for times, was DreamWorks. But their path to success was disjointed, kind of accidental. They stumbled into Shrek. And this possibility of making CGI animated movies that were a little irreverent, a little rude, and kind of taking the piss out of Disney. But The Road to El Dorado is like this fork in the road moment where DreamWorks decides this isn't working for us. We're not making any money and we need to pivot into something else. And kind of as a result, the 2D traditional hand-drawn animation kind of crumbles as a format. And it is a shame because The Road to El Dorado, I think, is a really, really excellent movie. And I've made videos about the other early DreamWorks animated movies, about Ants, The Prince of Egypt, and then Sinbad, which was this sort of relic that came out in 2003. They'd greenlit and produced it as part of this series of 2D animated movies that would go in sequence with Prince of Egypt, Road to El Dorado, and then Sinbad. And this was such a spectacular failure at the box office, Sinbad was, when it came out. I remember when that movie came out thinking like, really? They're making this kind of movie right now? And across those videos, I've told a condensed version of the history of DreamWorks, and it all centers on this one man, this one executive, Jeffrey Katzenberg, the executive who was in charge of DreamWorks Animation, the K in DreamWorks SKG. He was a Disney executive, and the media narrative, he was given credit for leading the Disney Renaissance, reviving their animation studios. Whether he deserved the credit or not, that's not for me to decide. I don't like to give executives credit, but the point is, in the media, he was given the credit. And when he left Disney in 1994 and started up a brand new movie studio with his billionaire buddies, Steven Spielberg and David Geffen, it was like, this guy is going to make way more Lion Kings at his brand new movie studio, because this is the guy who can make the Lion King. This is the guy who made Aladdin and Little Mermaid and Roger Rabbit even. He knows what he's doing. He's going to do it again and again and again. So as I detailed in my Prince of Egypt video, that movie was supposed to be their big cornerstone, their big tentpole movie, their version of The Lion King. In fact, more important than The Lion King, because this is about like Bible stuff. This is about real stuff. It's not about talking animals. It's about real stuff. Now, I mean, feel like any focus group of normal people could have told them people aren't going to be that into seeing a Sunday school movie. I mean, there have been tons of religious movies that have been giant hits. And indeed, a few years after Prince of Egypt, you'd have The Passion of the Christ, which would play like a Star Wars level blockbuster. But the thing is, when you're making one of those movies, when you're making a movie like that, you need to aim it very specifically at the church going audience. You need your movie trailer to end with the card that says, for church bookings, contact this phone number. And Prince of Egypt wasn't that. It was like, no, this is like a movie for everybody. You don't have to believe in Moses or whatever to enjoy this movie. But again, that is a great movie, The Prince of Egypt, which I had never seen until I made that video. And that too is a look at a future of American animation that could have been, had more people been willing to go see the movie about Moses. In that movie, you see a pure version of what the creative team wanted to do, where they set out to make a certain kind of movie, and they were given the freedom and the autonomy to make it all the way through production. But when you watch Road to El Dorado, you see kind of the opposite. You see a mess. You see so many different conflicting visions and ideas for what this movie should be, pulled in so many different directions. And you have really talented animators and writers and voice actors giving it their all, but it doesn't really, you see the seams, you see it changing directions midstream. All of that being said, it's surprising how well the whole thing works. The screenwriters, Elliott and Rossio, were the team behind Aladdin in the early 90s, and they would go on to write the Pirates of the Caribbean movies. In 2000, they did an interview with the website Cult Films and the people who make them, and they were shockingly open and forthright about how they felt about The Road to El Dorado. So the interviewer asks them, how is the finished film different from what you originally intended? And Rossio answers, quote, we originally intended the film to be good, end quote. So the story they tell is this. In 1995, Jeffrey Katzenberg approached them with the idea of setting a story in Mezo-America in the period of time, late Middle Ages, when European conquerors were arriving and basically ethnic cleansing the place. Now, why is this a good topic for a kid's movie, a family film? I don't know. But then again, Pocahontas came out in 95 and people seem to like that. So you just add some cute animals, you just add some fun songs, and bada bing, bada boom, you got a family sized hit. Now, Elliott and Rossio said that their idea was, we will lean into the amoral character of the conquistadors and center these scoundrels as the protagonists of the movie. And so for inspiration, they turned to the Road To movies from classic Hollywood. And I suppose now I have to tell you about what the hell the Road To movies are. And you've probably seen Family Guy, so you're just a little familiar with what they're parodying. But okay, Bing Crosby and Bob Hope were these big movie stars in the 40s and 50s, and they made 7 movies together. All the titles started with The Road To. They are very silly movies in which these scoundrels go to exotic locales and bumble and con their way into enormous camera's success and getting involved in local intrigue before they muck things up and have to end up on the road again. And I guess boomers like Seth MacFarlane watched these movies in reruns on TV all the time, and really he was determined to keep them alive. And look, I love classic Hollywood. I love classic comedies. I think some of the funniest movies ever made were made in the 20s and the 30s and the 40s. I'm not against any of this, but I had never had any interest whatsoever in watching any of these Road To movies. They did not appeal to me at all, but I thought, God damn it, I am a pro. I need to really, really understand for you, the people watching at home, what goes into making the Road to El Dorado. So I go to Google and I say, what is the best Road To movie starring Bing Crosby and Bob Hope? And the consensus seems to be Road to Morocco from 1942. So I punish myself and I pay $4 to rent it from Amazon Prime for you, for the people. And yeah, this movie sucks. Don't ever watch it. But I do see what they were going for, Rossio and Elliott. You see allusions to at least the Road to Morocco. And hey, I'll just assume that all other 6 Crosby Hope Road movies are just like the Road to Morocco, where you two guys get stranded on a little boat in the ocean. Oh, what's going to happen to us? Oh, woe is us. And then they stumble into fame and fortune, and then they squander it all. But again, the subject of the Road to El Dorado, ethnic cleansing in Mezo-America, an entire civilization wiped out by European colonizers. Yeah, I mean, like that would have played in 1942. You could make a fun, silly comedy about that, but is it a good idea to do that in the year 2000 when you theoretically, a little bit more, you're a little bit more evolved? To hear Terry Rossio tell it, the answer was, we're going to make this a really nuanced look at the situation. And he said in that same interview with Cult Films and the people who make them, quote, the original film was intended to be more ambitious, more complex, containing perhaps deeper characterizations, with an eye toward a more sophisticated storytelling to bring off a more sophisticated theme and more compelling drama. The finished film was simplified in every respect. End quote. And then Elliott follows that up by saying, quote, like we said, we wanted to do a movie which had comedic anti-heroes. In the finished movie, the characters are pretty much the ones we created, but the story is such that they come across much more as comic heroes. It isn't necessary for them to overcome their flaws and change in order to do the right thing. They just have to decide to do the right thing. Stories which hinge on a character who has to make a decision instead of having to change and take an action are inherently dull stories for a movie. And The Road to El Dorado is ultimately just a dull movie, end quote. I think that's an interesting point and you can see it in the movie, that these characters, a lot has to fall into place for them to make the right decision. It's not like much has to change about who they are. So I can see where he is coming from, even as I think it's not as bad as all of that. Guys, be a little kinder to the movie. But he goes on, quote, the problem obviously was that the milieu that Jeffrey had chosen, no less than the near annihilation of the Meso-American peoples and the destruction of their culture, didn't really lend itself to a flat-out comedy. We thought there had to be real enough depth in these characters to allow us to do a story which would allow for some real drama, tragedy even, end quote. Now, you can see pretty early in the running time of the movie that the movie itself is sort of rejecting the idea that both of these guys are without moral character. You have Miguel, voiced by Kenneth Branagh, and he shows right away he's kind of close to being your traditional stoic male lead. So first of all, they meet the crooked horse Altivo, who dives into the ocean after an apple, and Miguel, having just met the horse, dives in, risks his life to save the horse. That's not much of a scoundrel con artist move. Shortly after that, the two men and Altivo are stranded on their dinghy. They're floating on the ocean. They're talking about how they're certainly going to die and what do we regret most in life. And it's very funny. Kevin Kline as Tulio says what he regrets is, he says, I never had enough gold. And then Miguel says his regret is our greatest adventure is over before it began. So we see, like, this one yearns for adventure. He's not motivated by a lust for gold and a yearning for adventure. That's an admirable character trait, isn't it? But they make it to land. They stumble upon the city of El Dorado, the lost city of El Dorado. What do you know? It's actually very easy to find the lost city of El Dorado, whereupon they encounter an indigenous woman, Chell, voiced very hilariously by Rosie Perez. And she's a great character because, like them, Tulio and Miguel, she is also a scoundrel, is allowed to be a self-interested scoundrel. I'm going to try to stop saying the word scoundrel. Now, I should say this about The Road to El Dorado. I said I didn't know very much about the movie going in, but what I had heard through the grapevine is this is a very horny movie. And particularly, these two men are very horny for each other. Now, folks, I'm sorry to say, I just don't see it. I don't see the men being horny for each other. This seems like an exceptionally straight movie to me. Chell enters, the sexual sparks fly between her and Tulio, between her and Kevin Kline, and this causes a rift between Miguel and Tulio. I'm just a boring straight guy, so I have no imagination. The best I can give you is I think you can plausibly read this as maybe Tulio is bi and Miguel is gay and loves Tulio, or he's just in love with Tulio, and now Chell has come between them. The love is not reciprocated. Whatever the case may be, I will say that I'm grateful to DreamWorks Animation, to their team, for including a little bit more sexuality than we're allowed to see in movies like this. And Chell, anyway, they get to El Dorado. In fact, the road to El Dorado was pretty easy, all things considered. And I guess that's kind of the point, is that this civilization was vulnerable to colonization because it was just right there, unaware of the danger that was about to wash up on its shore. But our heroes make it to El Dorado, and they make it there before the conquistadors do. There's this parallel story where the conquistadors, who are led by this character Cortez, are looking for El Dorado. And you can certainly see a Disney version of this movie that centers Cortez and his men. And maybe a guy who works for Cortez, maybe he becomes like the John Smith from Pocahontas, who realizes what we're doing is wrong. These people are people too, and we should leave them alone. But the movie El Dorado, to its credit, plays these guys as unambiguously evil throughout the movie, start to finish. Now, where things get iffy is that Miguel and Tulio, when they arrive in El Dorado, and they use their con artist ways to convince the locals that they are gods. And at this point, I'm tugging my collar. This is a plot development right out of a Bing Crosby, Bob Hope movie. But I guess at least the movie has a rationale for why they are able to fool the villagers, because there are these two village elders who are skeptical of the claims these guys are making, at least a little skeptical, but they think we can use these guys for our own aims. These two characters, you have Chief Tannenbach, voiced by Edward James Olmos, and you have Zekel Khan, voiced by Armand Asante, and he is the real antagonist of the movie because, one, he practices human sacrifice, but his new European friends tell him, no, that's wrong, and then two, he collaborates with the conquistadors once they arrive. So our heroes settle into El Dorado. It's full of gold, and Tulio and Miguel, their paths now start to diverge. Their motives are starting to diverge because Tulio just wants to collect the gold and flee home to Europe, but Miguel has fallen in love with the place and he just wants to stay. And it's here where I can really relate to Elliott and Rossio for what they were complaining about. Like, now it's just a kind of rote hero's journey. But I haven't talked enough about the animation because I think that's what makes the movie really shine. That's what makes the movie really worth seeing more than anything. Now, it's very complicated when it comes to who do we credit this to, because for at least 3 years of this movie's production, the credited directors were Will Finn and David Silverman. They were the credited animation directors. Finn was a veteran character animator for Disney. This movie would be his directorial debut. David Silverman, meanwhile, is the most important animation director in the history of The Simpsons. He was the original supervising animator for the show. He wrote the rules for how to draw The Simpsons. He went on to direct The Simpsons movie. But The Road to El Dorado was the thing that lured him away from his job at The Simpsons. This was his chance to graduate to the world of feature animation. Now, the extent to which these guys worked on the movie is unclear, because buried in the closing credits of the movie is a card that says additional sequences directed by Will Finn and David Silverman. And it hasn't been reported exactly which sequences these are, but I think early in the movie there are some exceptionally funny sequences that really seem reminiscent of The Simpsons. When people talk about The Simpsons and how funny it is, they usually credit the writers for coming up with such great jokes, but equal weight really needs to be given to the animators such as Silverman for executing the jokes. The same is true here in this movie. Like, you can write on the page and then a shark jumps out of the water and eats the bird, but the animators have to bring it to life. They have to time it perfectly. They have to provide the acting for the characters who are watching this and reacting to it. So I think what truly makes this movie special is the combination of action spectacle with comedy. And I know it's easy to say, well, David Silverman is a Simpsons guy, so I'm going to credit him for the comedy, but it's all I can think about when I watch this movie is how much these gags seem like Simpsons gags in the way they look and the way they're timed. I also can't help but notice the movie gets a lot less funny the longer it goes. So the final credited directors are Bibo Bergeron, who will go on to direct Shark Tale for DreamWorks, and also to Don Paul. He is a veteran animator, but this movie is his only directorial credit is The Road to El Dorado. So Bergeron and Paul took over at some point during production. Katzenberg insisted this movie needs to be more comedic because The Prince of Egypt had come out, and while they'd made sure it made $100 million, kept it in theaters long enough so they could claim we got made $100 million, it wasn't The Lion King. It wasn't an enormous blockbuster. So they're like, all right, pivot to comedy. But the thing is, once you've animated something, there's only so much you can do to change it. It's not like a live action movie where you can retool it during production. Like you can't go find alternate takes to adjust the tone. And so that's where you feel the movie being pulled in different directions midstream. And then there's this other element that really, really doesn't fit, and that is the music by Elton John and Tim Rice. These were the guys who'd done the songs for The Lion King, and it worked out so well then, so just have them do it here. But the thing is, well, one thing, I'm very skeptical of animated musicals where the characters themselves don't sing, where the musical numbers are just in the soundtrack, or they just exist in the characters' minds, because then it feels like you can remove them and the movie stays exactly the same. And Rossio said about that, he said, quote, "I'm most unhappy with how the songs in the finished film simply don't work. At one time, there was a story design where they did work. The story design changed. The songs, for the most part, didn't. And that was one of our original goals, to do an animated musical where the songs had to be there to tell the story. In the best Howard Ashman tradition, it is perhaps the biggest failure of the movie." End quote. I think that you can look to Aladdin, the movie that they had previously written, which has Howard Ashman songs. And there you can see the perfect execution of the movie that they had in their heads, because it mixes successfully action adventure, really funny comedy, and a very traditional musical centered on somebody who just yearns for some transcendent experience. As it stands, though, I think that The Road to El Dorado is well worth your time, especially because it's a look at one of the last 2D animated movies that ever got made by a big Hollywood studio. And if it had made more money at the box office, maybe we'd still be getting more of these movies today. I will dock at major points for this. For CGI gold, which is such an eyesore, you can't stop looking at it. And it's so prominent in the big action climax of the movie. Like, why did they have to cheap out like this? The other interesting thing is that Disney also made a movie about Mezo-America in the year 2000, The Emperor's New Groove. Now, I don't know if this is a case like Ants, where Katzenberg at Dreamworks literally was like, to spite Disney, I'm going to make my own movie that I know Disney's also making. I don't know if he knew they were making a Meso-American movie and he insisted they make their own. I don't know. It's just interesting that you have another instance of twin films. It's just such a shame. I wish this movie would have been a big hit. It's a really fun movie, and it's always a shame when any studio doesn't have conviction about what they're making. So if you grew up with The Road to El Dorado, tell me, what do you remember about it? Do you like the songs? Really, that's what I want to know more than anything is do these songs burrow their way into their head? Because they all sound extremely forgettable to me, but I think this is a really funny movie, and I look forward to hearing from you about the movie. And one final thing, if you enjoyed this video, I have tons of other video essays about animated movies, but I really think you will enjoy my podcast, 1 Week Rental. It comes out every Friday in full video here on YouTube, or you can listen to it wherever you hear podcasts. On every episode, my co-host Lacey and I go through the history of a movie's production, and then we talk extensively. We review a movie, discuss it, analyze it, make jokes about it, often for 2 hours or more. Please subscribe and like and all of that. Thank you. Thank you so much.